Welcome to Pandemic, ladies and gentlemen. Are we having fun yet, boys and girls? I most certainly am, I must say. Pandemic is a multi-billion-dollar business. Coffee is for closers, and I've got a piece of it. There's an ancient Chinese curse that you might live in interesting times. That surely we have. And the Mandarin character for crisis is a unique marriage of two Mandarin characters, danger and opportunity, to remind us, boys and girls, that wherever there is danger, there is always opportunity. And fortune favors the bold. So you want to be a winner, you got to be bold. So you got to ask yourself in pandemic today, do you feel lucky? How do I feel? I feel with my hands, like a scientist would say. If you are still alive in a pandemic that has claimed the lives of over 900,000 Americans, boys and girls, leading the world in a global public health crisis that to date, on a Super Bowl Sunday, has claimed the lives of exactly 5,783,776 victims worldwide as of February 11th, 2022 at 7:21 p.m. Central European Time. According to the World Health Organization, my friend, maybe you are lucky. But even Harvard professor of astrophysics Richard Feynman can tell you that in Las Vegas, Sin City, where everything that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, the real gamblers don't rely on dumb luck and serendipity make their luck. And if you are feeling pretty lucky, my friend, in a pandemic, where the strong survive and the weak perish, good for you. What does that tell you? You are ultimately a loser in this game. Just getting by in a pandemic on dumb luck. And this virus isn't stupid. So the good news is, or maybe the bad news is, today on Super Bowl Sunday, loser, you're fired. But you have a chance today to recoup your losses, boys and girls, because you have been chosen as a project management team to develop a solution for a pandemic pathogen that has infected exactly 77,516,009 Americans, and that has been attributed to the deaths of 915,425 as of 8 p.m. 2000 for my military friends. Hours Eastern Standard Time on February 12, 2022. According to the CDC COVID-19 data tracker, most of whom have been the elderly in nursing homes. Over 75%, even after the delivery of efficacious, not effective vaccines approved by the FDA. Almost 20,000 veterans in veteran care facilities, 912 kids, 13 of them in Virginia, in America. A known fatality high-risk age cohort, the elderly, from the very beginning. 80% of those in China, amongst almost 56,000 cases, at most experienced mild pneumonia. But today, there is a new product, and apparently the new push by Pfizer and Moderna to gain approval for vaccinations of children below the age of 5 has been put on a 2-month delay. A 2-month delay, perhaps in recognition of the fact that worldwide, according to UNICEF, there have only been around 23,000 fatalities amongst children under the age of 19. Only 910 children in America below the age of 18, and only 13 in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Like it's not a big emergency when you look at the whole picture of 5.7 million dead. But in your news today, perhaps you have been diverted, wanted to get away from the pandemic, about a tantalizing story about the former President Donald Trump, involving what appears to be a total of 15 boxes containing classified information. We all like to hear about top secrets, looking at James Bond, for which a sudden emergency had arisen at the White House to have immediately returned. Now, how did you not notice 15 boxes in your White House of classified information until a year later? That's another question. I'm not in charge at the White House. What you may or may not know about classified information is that a former president actually retains his personal security clearance. And under Executive Order 12958, the president is the ultimate. The sitting president is the ultimate security classification authority to determine what is classified, what is not. So that means that, well, one, the president could just decide that it's not classified anymore. But also that means that he would possess a top secret personnel security clearance, even when he left the White House. And that simple possession of a top secret document by a former president is not of itself an indication of criminal conduct. But for the next few moments, with Valentine's Day approaching and the feelings of romance and love in the air, for those people that are into that kind of thing, feelings, we are going to talk a little bit for your edification about a Valentine's Day card that the Chief Justice is expecting from the current president involving handling of classified information. The big topic that is going on down in Florida about these 15 boxes. And this falls just like a box of classified information. You never know what's inside. And this falls under a legal doctrine that attorneys would describe in legalese and legal terms of art as executive privilege. Perhaps you have heard this term before, reading your Tom Clancy novels or watching your James Bond films. Well, boys and girls, according to the Legal Information Institute at the Cornell University, a very prestigious Ivy League college with a Tier 1 law school for those who are impressed by things like that. Shiny objects. Executive privilege is the power of the president and other officials in the executive branch to withhold certain forms of confidential communication from the courts and the legislative branch. And this would of necessity include those matters and documents that are designated as classified information, confidential, secret, and top secret. And according to these legal experts at Cornell University, not quite, of course, Fox News, the Constitution is silent on the executive power to withhold information from the court or Congress. The privilege is rooted in the separation of powers doctrine that divides the power of the United States government into legislative, executive, and judicial branches, or as AOC might describe as the four chambers of government, even though I only counted 3, executive, judicial, and legislative, and prefer the accepted term of branches of government. Chambers of Congress and branches of government may just be my personal preference, and you are perfectly free to disagree. But because executive privilege has not been expressly defined in the Constitution, this presents a condition of ambiguity. Things are not quite clear, seeing through a glass darkly and not face to face for our religious friends who close their church. Since in the case of Marbury v. Madison, cited to free, as you may recall from your American history classes or not, Chief Justice Marshall decided that it is the emphatic duty and province of the judiciary department to say what the law is. This falls squarely within the domain of the judiciary powers of the court to define exactly what are the limits and the range and the scope of the use of the claim of executive privilege by a sitting president, who, as we have said under Executive Order 12958, is the ultimate classification authority, who has the power to decide what is classified or not at the time. Classified or not at the time. Again, going back to our legal experts at Cornell University, said in reverse such tones, they assert that United States v. Nixon, also known as the Watergate scandal, has established that even a president has a legal duty to provide evidence of one's communications with his aides when the information is relevant to a criminal case, by requiring the president to turn over recordings of private conversations that he had with his aides. The court's decision has helped frame how to define executive privilege in a judicial setting. And we all have some familiarity with Rosemary Woods and the missing tapes from Watergate. We remember Watergate, the intimate connection of the investigative journalism by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein at the Washington Post, who broke the scandal. Perhaps not the 9 reporters that were dispatched to the Watergate after a third-rate burglary to which the D.C. police sent only 2 police officers, or the reporter who was so anxious that he broke a window to get in to get the story. But we might be familiar with the Hollywood film starring the A-list actors Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman, who look nothing at all like Woodward and Bernstein, if you've ever seen them. So let's take a ride back to the past in our time-traveling DeLorean to July 8, 1974, when the matter of U.S. v. Nixon was argued before the justices sitting before on the Supreme Court. A time perhaps before many of you were even born, especially the millennials, and even I myself was just completing the 3rd grade, going into the 4th grade, a rising 4th grader. But as a big Nixon fan, yes, I admit it, I was a Nixon fan. I was rooting for Tricky Dick. And maybe you were not a supporter of the president, like my mother. And maybe if you were standing outside the court that day with a sign, you would be rooting against the president. Everyone, again, is entitled to their opinion in our democracy. That is why we have free and fair democratic elections, and the guy with the most votes wins. That's just the way that it is. That's the way the game is played. But on July 24th, 1974, really quickly for a Supreme Court case, under a month, this was a matter this matter was decided. They came out with an opinion. It was a matter that was brought on what has been described as the shadow docket. Very, very secret. Before Chief Justice Warren Burger, who had succeeded Chief Justice Earl Warren in 1969, who had handed down the landmark decision in Brown v. Board of Education, as you may recall. Earl Warren, the Warren Court. And he was appointed by Democrat President Lyndon Johnson. Johnson appoints Burger, ushering in the era known as the Burger Court. Sounds like the food court, but no, it is the last liberal court, which, maybe you like food court sushi, a liberal court which held the majority until 1986 during the years of the Reagan administration. Boo, hiss, or say hooray, depending on your team. And sports fans, if you were not rooting for Richard Nixon, you probably would have been doing a victory dance for your team outside the court in the summer of July 1974 because your team won, hooray, at the Super Bowl contest during the impeachment of President Nixon. But in the court, the teams are not very important in a rule of law. What matters in the courts is not whether you won or lost, but the rules that we decide how we play this game. And you look like an intelligent person with your little football jersey on, sipping beer, thinking that you're in the game. So, boys and girls, what did Progressive Chief Justice Warren Burger say? The liberal or progressive Burger Court said, and you might want to write this down to remember, might forget, the impediment that an absolute unqualified privilege would place in the way of the primary constitutional duty of the judicial branch to do justice in criminal prosecutions would plainly conflict with the function of the courts under Article 3, where we discuss courts in the Constitution, and designing the structure of our government and dividing and allocating the sovereign power among 3 co-equal branches. branches, not chambers. The framers of the Constitution sought to provide a comprehensive system, but these separate powers were not intended to operate with absolute independence. They are interdependent. What was Chief Justice Burger saying, if you may recall from your civics and American history classes? And we have some, perhaps at the Arlington NAACP, need to brush up on those courses. He was talking about that notion of checks and balances that was discussed by whom in the Federalist Papers. And that's not the check and balance at your bank. Checks and balances in the Constitution. Did you say James Madison? Then very good, you get a shiny star. Balance of powers is a fundamental part of the Constitution of the United States, with the 3 branches of government, or 4 chambers for some others. Again, you are entitled to your opinion, but this is what Chief Justice Burger, the liberal, the progressive, said. And this was his rationale or reasoning behind his decision when he laid down this rule to decide the Watergate case. And in precedent, or what attorneys call stare decisis, to be followed in the rule of law in our democratic form of government, for which Michelle Obama wants us all to vote in the next election like democracy depends on it. Are you ready? Grab a pencil and paper to write this down, because it is important in understanding this idea about executive privilege, the topic of discussion for today. Are you ready, boys and girls? Neither the doctrine of separation of powers nor the need for confidentiality of high-level communications without more can sustain an absolute, unqualified presidential privilege of immunity from judicial process under all circumstances. So Chief Justice Burger said the president is not a king, just like Don Bio was quoted as saying during the first impeachment of Donald Trump. And if you voted for Don Bio, you probably said amen. So just say amen again. But Chief Justice Burger goes on to say, yes, there's more, that the president's need for complete candor and objectivity from advisors calls for great deference from the courts. Deference is just a term to describe a permissive grant of wide latitude or discretion, meaning that courts are not going to be too quick to cast judgment, just like when governors implemented sweeping lockdowns, now determined not to have worked, and known before they were implemented not to work, and issued facial coverings mandates, facial coverings that were known before not to have worked, on the account of a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic. So again, if you voted against Nixon, voted for Joe Biden, or voted for Ralph Northam, or voted for Barack Obama, you should agree with this, because a liberal Chief Justice, Chief Justice Burger said this. Warren Burger. But then, Chief Justice Burger continued to say, however, a little caveat or proviso, when the privilege depends solely on the broad, undifferentiated claim of public interest in the confidentiality of such conversations, a confrontation with other values arises. So Chief Justice is claiming that this grant of discretion is not plenary or not without limits. And if you want to impress your friends and sound like an attorney, not necessarily thinking like one, you can add that word to your vocabulary. Plenary means unlimited license to do whatever you want. Licentiousness, just like a king. And Chief Justice Burger lays down this rule that absent a claim of need to protect military, diplomatic, or sensitive national security secrets, we find it difficult to accept the argument that even the very important interest in confidentiality of presidential communications is significantly diminished by the production of such material for in-camera inspection with all the protection that a district court will be obliged to provide. So, first, this in-camera term does not mean a briefing with the camera flashing and the video crews taping necessarily. And if he is providing protection for classified information, they're probably not going to be there. But is a Latin term That means in the chamber or in the court or in private for the judge to see. Eyes only. Sounds like a James Bond film song, but your eyes only. So you can impress your friends again with that addition to your vocabulary. But the meat of that argument is that absent a reasonably credible claim of a need to protect military, diplomatic, or sensitive national security secrets, not even the president can refuse to produce documents to a court or provide information to a judge.
%95 of businesses fail. Give less than 5% chance of getting COVID-19. Are you a loser or are you a winner? This briefing is unclassified, as you will. Honest, as you are.
My friend, unless your daddy happens to own the railroad, we're going to enjoy a very brief acquaintance.
Hey, sugar, where's my coffee?
You still here? I told you, you're fired. Go away.
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
You're fired.